Hello, beloved. It's good to be with you and to join you for a bit of sacred reading this week. As you may know, if you've been following along, we're reading now through the Book of Ruth. We have entered the second chapter. If you don't know what sacred reading is and you haven't been following along, let me say that for me recently, sacred reading has been a real lifeline. There have been moments when I haven't known what to pray, what to say, what to do in response to the things that I see happening in the world. And I look for encouragement, reassurance, a word of wisdom, perhaps a direction, perhaps a kick in the pants for me to engage in a different way. And sacred reading has really done that for me in my own personal life. If you don't know what sacred reading is, it is reading a text, generally a sacred text of some sort, with the anticipation that Spirit, in a subtle way or a not so subtle way, will speak into your life, my life, our lives, something we need to hear and need to know, need to be reminded of, need to be encouraged by. And so we read the text. The way I do it by myself is I read it 3 times aloud, not just to myself, but aloud, listening for the sounds and perhaps any of the interesting alliterations and connections that may happen within the text. I listen for a word, a phrase, or an image that rises up in me. It's not the same as deep Bible study where you try to figure out what the original writer might have meant, what the context was, but instead you listen more deeply to say, what is this saying to me that I need to hear today? It may be one word, it may be several words, and from that you draw into your life the things that matter, perhaps that you think Spirit may want to say to you. So we're in chapter 2. We just crossed over into chapter 2 today. We're reading verses 1 through 3. I will read it aloud to us only one time, just as a matter of time. I will pause for a moment, during which time you can reflect. You can stop the video. You can go off and read it by yourself, aloud to yourself in your own version if you choose to. Or you can wait, and after a moment's pause, I will speak what I heard, more as an example of what someone might hear in a text than to say this is the only thing that could be heard. Because as you know, if you've ever read sacred texts, you read them one day and something stands out to you. You might read them a week later, even an hour later, and something different stands out to you as you listen to it. So let's listen together to Ruth chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Listen with me for a word from the Lord. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech. His name was Boaz, and he was well-to-do. One day, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go into the fields and be a gleaner, gathering the leftover grain behind anyone who will take pity on me." And Naomi said, "Go ahead, my daughter." So Ruth went out into the fields to follow the harvesters and gather the grain that they dropped. As Providence would have it, she came to the part of the field that was owned by Boaz of Elimelech's clan. So here's what I hear when I listen to this text. Now, admittedly, having studied this text before, I'm aware of the situation in the times that this may have been written. We've already alluded to in past weeks how women did not have access to the means of living. They could not work and often had to attach themselves to a male household in order uh, to uh, to be cared for, to have food to eat and a place to stay. And consequently, um, that's where Naomi, the mother-in-law, and the daughter-in-law Ruth find themselves, um, trying to make ends meet, trying to have enough to eat. And so when I listen to this text, I'm reminded, first of all, that there are lots of people in the world who live hand to mouth, who are struggling to make it in the world. Being reminded of that, it reminds me of my own responsibility to do something, whatever is mine to do within my power, to do something about that. The folks who are living on the edge deserve to be cared for. Now, as it turns out, Ruth volunteers to her mother-in-law, the older Naomi, that she will go and glean the leftovers from the fields so that they would have something to eat. Now, without going into the depth of it, we'd have to do a deep study, and that's not what Lectio Divina or sacred reading is about. But without going deeply into it, the early some of the early Levitical laws, the laws of the people, were to provide for and care for those who were poorer, and they were allowed to glean around the edges and the leftovers in the field, anything that dropped. And so, in order to feed their families, this, at least as I understand it, was the way that it was. And so Ruth, in her sense of responsibility for her mother-in-law, Naomi, goes out to do just that. They are both hanging on the edge of life, as so many in our world are. And I'm reminded, at the very least, of those who hang on the very edge, who live hand to mouth, who wonder where their next meal will come from, let alone a place to live and safety of any kind. And I don't think it's a bad thing here at the beginning of the Lenten season, which is when we're reading this, the season of Lent being 40 days of self-examination and preparation, in some cases self-denial, as we move towards Easter. During this period of self-reflection, to be well aware of the world in which I live and the people who don't have access to all the things that I currently do. And rather than just being mindful of them, I'm called to act on their behalf in some way, along with those folks, not to those folks, but with those folks, knowing that we all matter. That's what the text said to me today. So be aware of the blessings you have in your life, the things that you carry that are gifts to you, and be aware that your calling on your life would be to do what you can to alleviate anyone else's struggles in this world as well, because we are all sharing in a common humanity. I don't think it was ever God's intent that some people should become rich on the backs of the very poor. But that's straight outside of what Ruth said to us today. So just remember, you're infinitely precious and unconditionally loved for the gift you already are. And I wish you all the very best until the next time I